So good evening. Thank you all for attending this evening, and thank you all for participating in tonight's panel. As a means of introduction, how about we start something easy? Hopefully it's easy, but let's just start fresh. How did you get into this industry / field, this work? We're talking about community development, and then also specifically if you're representing an entity, so Boyce here in this question, tell us how you got started in this your work as far as the organization.
Well, I took a very interesting path to get where I am today. Started out in the private sector in the banking. Moved there to the city on my first stint, doing economic development, providing loans to small minority businesses in the city of Columbus, being a liaison to the business association with the city. Moved there to Cleveland, Ohio, to be the vice president of government media relations. Didn't know what the heck I was doing, so they let me go. I came back and started working with Columbus Urban Growth, my first entree into actually urban development a while ago under the leadership of David Baker and Michael Coleman. And so I continued in that path, became the development director for 7 years under Michael Coleman. And we had a policy of looking at urban development and how we do it, where should the city be. And then I took this assignment running a nonprofit, private sector real estate development corporation. I've been there for about 10 years.
Thanks for the question, and it's an honor to be here with this panel. I'm William Murdock, and I'm a longtime Columbus resident, a longtime Central Ohio resident. And what I wanted to do with my career is I wanted to help our community get better, and I wanted to work on the environment. And so I went to school, got a degree in both of them, and started my career in Gahanna, and worked there about a decade and worked on everything from, if you know Gahanna at all, worked from redeveloping their Creekside project to cleaning up an abandoned landfill. At one point they had me running a jazz festival. When you are a city planner like me, they hear the word planner and they tell you to do things. So those of you who are event planners, I hear you, it's hard work and I don't want to do that anymore. But I worked there for about 10 years and went to the state of Ohio where I ran a program called Clean Ohio Brownfield. And we cleaned up contaminated sites across the state of Ohio, and that grew into some other things. And long story short, I've been in this position at the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission for the last decade. And if you know us, we go by acronym, which is MORPC, and we work to help Central Ohio get ready for growth. We help stabilize households. We work on transportation. We work on the environment. And this is what I'd hoped I could do with my career, and I get to work with a bunch of smart people and community leaders to help make it happen.
Thank you.
So what was the question again? I didn't heard some
Right.
phenomenal things.
I'm like, who are you? What do you? No, I'm kidding. So what got you into this industry? Just familiarize them again with your name, and then, well, for you guys, yeah, that's it. It's fine.
I was voluntold to be in. No, Jason Jenkins. It's a pleasure. First, before we go any further, I just want to say I'm up here with a phenomenal panel, including Avery. Avery has done phenomenal work in the community, and then I also want to shout out my team. I got some folks here from the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Please raise your hand. Raise your hand for the people in the back. Love you guys. Thank you. What got me here? I think similar to Boyce, took a very unorthodox path. I started out in a nonprofit, working with Big Brothers Big Sisters, YMCA, doing a lot of programming in that space. Moved up to vice president at Big Brothers Big Sisters, and then that kind of took a turn for me over at OSU, and did a lot of work regionally with OSU. A lot of fundraising, a lot of development work. That kind of got me down the path of working with some small businesses, individuals that own small businesses, engaging different folks in different spaces, and also on the development side. So when you look at Lane Avenue and High Street, all those dorms, was some projects that I worked on in that space. So that was very interesting. Nothing I ever thought I'd be a part of. And then I got a phone call to participate and work in the mayor's office. And I didn't know anything about politics at the time, just really wasn't into the political space other than every 4 years you vote for a president, right? Especially local politics. I've been traveling so much with OSU, so this was interesting. And then I found out that, every 4 years you could lose your job because there's the potential for the mayor not to get reelected. So having 3 kids, that really wasn't that appealing. But the service work was very appealing. So I worked in the mayor's office for 5 years and did external affairs work, and that really challenged me in a lot of ways as it relates to engaging the community, how the community is dealing with certain situations, what the city can and can't do, some of our limitations. And so having this opportunity to really dive deeper into diversity, equity, and inclusion has provided me the skill set, the tools, the team to really change some of those things that I was seeing, a lot of those inequities that I was seeing.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you all for being here for sure today. So let's go into the hard questions. No, I'm kidding. It's not that hard.
If they're like that sheet I got, it they're hard questions.
I am reading off of the sheet.
They're hard questions.
Yeah, no, but seriously, let's do some level setting. So we talked
Okay.
about how you got here, but let's talk about like if you would have to be not paying attention to not see how Columbus has been developing over the last few years. And so from your perspective, from your different seats and what you're looking at, how has city planning and development changed in the last 5 years? And for good or bad, you don't even have to like say if it was good or bad, but just how has it changed in the last 5 years?
Since you're the planning guy, I come behind you.
All right. So thanks for the question. This is one that is on everybody's mind. And our team at MORPC, we do a lot of thinking about that and a lot of study of it because we want to give communities the tools to get in front of this. And I think something that has changed in Central Ohio is the awareness of growth. So sometimes it's housing prices, sometimes it's cranes, but there's been a lot of discussion about not just the growth that's happening today, but what about the growth that's coming. And what we've done is we've forecasted that out. And if you think the growth is just a temporary phenomenon, we're expected to add 750,000 people in the next 25 years. And that's not meant to scare us, but when you look forward, what that's meant to do is say, there are two paths. We could let that happen to us, and sometimes we've seen that in other communities, sometimes we've seen it here, or we could make the investments and do the planning today so that we like to say, get better as we grow bigger. And that's really what we're focused on. It's also something too, when we look around the country, communities that are growing quickly like us are not just experiencing the benefits of growth, but they're also experiencing increasing disparities. And that really has us concerned because we're seeing the same phenomenon in our region, in Columbus. And so we think it's even more urgent over these next few years to make the investments, the improvements that we need to do now so that growth actually gets better instead of worsening some of these things. How's that?
That's good.
All right, all right.
That sounded like you went to Ohio State.
Well, I did.
But here's my take on it. Since I was the development director in the 2000s, early 2000s under Coleman, Columbus is growing. I was born and raised in Columbus, Ohio. East Side that's all I knew.
East Side?
East Side, that's all I knew. And then it started with a vision that collectively Columbus had, the Columbus way. And how do we work together for the benefit of all communities? I think for a while, people were scared of the true urban communities. A lot of perception, they want to be over there, didn't know how to talk to them. We tackled that. Now, we didn't know exactly what we were doing. We just said, we're just going to go ahead and bulldoze our way, be cordial, say thank you, I'm sorry, but let's get it done. Columbus is a unique city versus other cities that's growing. We have the capacity and accessibility to talk to everyone and have everybody in the room to deal with the issue. Let MORPC do all the planning stuff that people come in. Let the city work with the community, all communities, and help it grow and tie in. It's very important that we challenge Bill and his counterparts to make sure there's people in there of diverse backgrounds speaking up. A lot of times people downtown speak for someone and don't really know what's going on. But make sure that you have the right people that are savvy enough in the room to articulate what the King Lincoln Bronzeville area is feeling, what the Linden community is feeling, the lack thereof, then everybody can participate. Intel can't work unless King Lincoln Bronzeville works. Intel can't work unless Linden works. And they know that, but they don't know how to do that. They don't. So it's incumbent upon the right people to get in the room and do what they need to do. Columbus is a unique city, very unique. You can go to any other urban areas and not this much activity in those urban areas like it is on Long Street. Trust me. We all think there is, but there isn't. So I think it is change, development is going to happen. Change is going to happen. Embrace it, understand it, and use it to the benefit of a particular area. And make sure that you're in the room on those discussions on planning, right?
Jason?
The development. So let's look at the numbers. So Columbus is the only city in the Midwest that has grown over the last 3 years. Am I correct on that? 3 to 4 years?
More than that.
So we're carrying all of Ohio at this point. City right now is sitting on a $2 billion budget. Let's look at what the city does, though. We do infrastructure, we do safety, and we do waste. You know, Rome was built on those three premises. Every city has to do that well, or no electeds get reelected. So those are the things that we know that we do well. And when we start looking at developing and growing and building out our city, the one thing to speak to what Boyce was saying is, are we doing it inclusively? Are we doing it equitably? Where are we putting our resources? Those three primary things we have to make sure we target on. But with the resources and the accessibility, we need to really start looking at what barriers are in front of individuals to take down those barriers, to move everybody in the same path that we're moving in. Columbus is growing. It's going to keep growing. There's nothing that we don't want to stop that. We want to see that growth, but are we growing in the right way? Are we growing with everybody at the helm? That's the question that my office is consistently asking. Who all's at the table? Are the right people at the table? Similar to what Boyce was saying. And if they're not, how do we get them in the room? What are the barriers? What's stopping them from getting there? How do we make sure that we're growing in the right direction with the right people at the helm?
That was an important last point. So thank you for all of your responses. And part of that, and I want to keep going, so we're always going to, we know Columbus is one of the most growing, thriving metropolitan areas in the country. We know that to be true. How do we make sure that it is equitable, right? How do we actually ensure that? But more importantly, not more importantly, as importantly, are there any other metro areas that you can point to that has been doing some good equity work that we can use as a best practice? Because one thing that we want to know are, what are some of the trends? What are some of the things in development that are making sure that everybody in the area is benefiting from that development? And so we asked the question, but with equity in mind. And so are there other metro areas that you might be able to point to say, hey, they're doing that, they've figured it out, or they're figuring it out? Because I don't think anybody has truly figured out the equity here in the United States. But are there any that pop to mind?
Yeah, when I think about some of the cities that, well, let me say this. I think that cities like Austin, Charlotte, you see some of our Midwestern cities that are looking at equity, and that's a broad term. It is a broad term. And so they have to define it for what fits within their city. The way that we're looking at it is, how do we measure where we're putting our resources? So we're using equity as a lens to measure the work that we're doing, right? But each city is doing it a little differently. And like I said, you have Austin, but Austin's going backwards now because they've exploded when it comes to development, when it comes to growth. So they're trying to backtrack. And we're on the front end and looking at Austin like, yeah, we don't want to get there, right? So then you look at Charlotte, who's growing, who's developing, who's looking at it, but they're a couple years behind where we're at. So we're looking at some of the things that they're bringing online, and they're early enough in the game to start bringing those things online. So we do have some benchmark cities that we've looked at, that we're looking at, how are you doing that program? How is it working within the space that you operate? The other thing, the caveat that we have to look at is their government structure, what's their code, their policy, their charter. It's a lot easier to do certain things in other cities just because they don't have the same parameters, and it's a lot harder to do things in other cities because they don't have the same parameters. So being comfortable with loopholes and trying to find different ways to adjust, but there are some benchmark cities that we are looking at. But again, equity is such a broad definition. We had to hone in on our definition of equity, and we're using that as our rule brick, so to speak, to measure the work that we're doing, whether it's going in the right direction, whether the right people are at the table, those type of things.
I mean, it's a great question, and it's really easy when you look around the country to see what other communities are doing wrong. It's really easy. And some of these growth cities, Austin, Charlotte, Nashville, it's really easy to see, oh my gosh, the traffic, the housing unaffordability, the lack of equity. So that's common in growth cities. So what we've been focused on are looking at the examples within those cities that might be working. And so in Austin, they're doing some really creative financing around housing because their housing costs are much worse than ours. And they're looking to infuse equity into deals in different ways. They're maybe you've been looking at this too, but to help try to solve that problem and to solve it quickly. We've looked at Atlanta, and Atlanta has something called the Beltline. If you haven't seen it, it's really cool, where they're trying to connect development and housing and recreation in a way that tackles equity head on and tackles wealth building head on. And we've been inspired by that as we've been looking at some of our work. Maybe the last thing, we've looked at even places like Salt Lake City, where they're looking at the connection between transportation and redevelopment and transportation and equity. And there are lessons there as we're planning things like mass transit or passenger rail. What they've done is what we want to do, and that's make sure we know where we've been and make sure we've got the legacy of what transportation projects have done to this community, to our region, and make sure we're at least aware of it so we're planning differently the next time. And I think keeping that awareness in front is something that we've been really impressed in.
Jason, I'm glad you defined equity for me because I didn't know what it meant.
Right, I was saying, we need to probably go to that.
Yeah,
honestly,
thank you. I'm on a different side of things. I look at equity and to see how each neighborhood is changing for the better. How do we start it, looking at stabilizing and how it becomes better? When I was out here doing the Lincoln Theater, Susan, Brad's, we go back a long way. I didn't look at other cities. I just knew we had to do it, and we had a great opportunity to revitalize this theater, to build upon something, the King Arts Complex, because I don't think there was no comparison. And so we made sure that we marshaled the resources, put together the team, and made sure that this community could be a part of the broader community in conversation. How I define equity is how do each community, suffering community or low investment community, be uplifted to be a part of the conversation. That's equity to me, instead of certain neighborhoods being an afterthought. How do we make sure that every neighborhood is in a position, whether they choose to be or not, can pull from other stuff? That's it.
I think we're walking up to the question that I think we're going to really get at today. But as we approach it, my question is, so when we're talking about neighborhoods and we're talking about people, because people make up neighborhoods, how do we ensure that neighborhoods are uplifted in a way that everybody who wants to live in the neighborhood is able to stay?
When you say stay,
there are some people who might have lived in families that might have lived in a neighborhood for quite some time. And because of the way that the neighborhood is changing with property taxes and that kind of thing, and even they might not own the property, so they may be just renters who have been there for some time. What do we do? How do we, if there is a family or a community that wants to participate in the development of neighborhoods, how do we make sure that they can do that?
Well, I think going back in my past, Columbus has a real good process through the city where they do community planning. And most recently, the Near East Side, King Lincoln, Bronzeville had the blueprint. Linden has the one Linden. Mayor Ginther is getting ready to start Eastland. Conversation on where the neighborhood is and where folks that are living there would like to see it go and who is its partners. That's a great exercise to start the conversation. That's a great exercise to participate. Unfortunately, not everyone participates, and you shouldn't expect 100% participation. But it has to start with conversations with the community, and I tell people, do not be fearful of the community. Most folks are fearful of the community. They don't know if it's going to get unruly, they're going to be called this and all that. You know, they said they should fire me, dump me in the river 10 times. And I just kept going and looking at them and saying, I'm back again. Maybe I'm stupid. But that's the first thing. And then you got to make sure that, you know, understand who needs to be a part of that discussion that can help. You're always going to want the city, but you got to ask the city the right questions. Because sometimes the city don't even know. I'll be honest with you. They afraid to say we don't know, but they don't know. You got to build in, Murdock, talk about the bigger picture and how the overall city is growing and how we plug in. You got to understand that. You got to get the right information so you can make the best possible decision for your neighborhood and participate. Bottom line, you have to participate. I don't care what it is. And sometimes it's hard and you don't want to go at night and sit there from 6 to 9. You're missing your shows. You're missing a basketball game, you know. But at the end of the day, you're going to have a better outcome than when you're sitting downtown trying to think of what's best. And you have to walk the community. On the Adelphi, we had the architects wanted to do it. I said, hey, let's come walk the neighborhood. Because I'm not the type of walk the neighborhood. I got to feel the vibe, what the neighborhood feels like, what the streets are saying. Say hello to people. So I had them come out. And they were white architects from Short North. Are we going to be okay on Long Street? Yeah, you with me, man. I'm more scared than them. If something happened, I'll probably outrun them moving it. But they came out here and said, hey, I only give you 2 hours to walk. And we started out here and walked. I left them at hour 3. They were still in the community. Susan would tell you, they stayed here and went upstairs and looked upstairs. They wanted to be a part. They signed all kind of memberships and all kind of stuff, and the contributions, but they got the feeling of the community. And when they went back to the design at Delphi, they understood what folks were saying. That's a good effort. And they're not afraid. And so I think in Columbus, we started the process. We kind of understand it. We got to get the right folks that continue and well-meaning folks in the room to say, look, we have to pay attention. A lot of things wouldn't happen out here if Mayor Coleman, Mayor Ginther, myself, and others did not pay attention to the community. It would have never worked. The Lincoln Theater would never have sustained itself if we didn't.
I mean, I think what he said was just brilliant. And, you know, we've got Neil, jurist, and Melissa from my team here who advocate that when we're doing planning, we can't just sit in our office and hope that people come for to our open house. We got to go to where the people are. And for us, that means we've been trying to innovate, going to festivals, showing up at Saturday mornings at food banks. We've been even tackling the technology challenge, trying to engage people virtually. We do transportation planning, and for those who have the access to it, they can plot the roads or the sidewalks they want fixed online, which is really cool. But to your question about keeping people in neighborhoods, one of the things we do that we think is so important is to stabilize housing. We talk a lot about building new housing. It's important. We need a lot of it. But we run a program that helps people stay in their homes. And the most affordable home, we like to say, is the home that people are already in. And it's really hard, whether you're aging or you've had an issue with a job or a health situation, if you can't afford your energy bill, if you've got windows or roofs that need fixed, and all of a sudden your life can snowball and that can get away from you. And so stabilizing that, especially in the face of new development and all the other crises you can face, we think that's such an important part of the equation.
So similar to that, the city has a multitude of programs, and some that again, what we can and what we can't control. State controls property tax and county, and so really working with our partners on that side of government to say, you know, what does it look like to freeze property tax for folks who have are on fixed income, especially when you have neighborhoods like Bronzeville exploding, right? $1 million houses right up the street. So there are conversations that's happening in that space, the bond package. So I want to say this real quick, shameless plug for my boss, Mayor Ginther, and if you're watching this, thank you, has done a phenomenal job when we talk about this bond package in our housing, right? I think 70% of our residents approved the bond package. Like we were saying, in regards to stabilizing homes and individuals in their homes, this money can be used for that, but then also developing more affordable. And when I say affordable, I don't want any misconceptions. When we talk about affordable, we talk about only spending 30% of your income on housing. So what's obtainable to you? Not to the person sitting next to you, not to the individual down the street, but what is obtainable to you? And you should be allowed to live in any neighborhood that you want to, spending only 30% of your income. And that's what we mean by affordable. Now that is some ups and downs, some broad strokes, that is some creative tax abatements that we're gonna have to pull out to make this thing work. It's capital stacking for any developer, because for developers, the numbers have to match up, or they just won't develop it. If they're losing money, they won't develop it. If you were a small business owner, you can do it out the kindness of your heart, but if you're not able to feed your family, that business is not gonna last. And so when we look at working with these developers, we're very intentional about how they get resources from the city. What is it that you're going to do for our residents? Because we're service oriented, we're service focused, to move forward and move these residents and make sure that these residents are able to stay in place. And you know, for some individuals, it may not be in that same house, but it's in that neighborhood that they know and they love. So really looking at that. The one other thing that I think the mayor has done that's phenomenal is looking at our zoning codes. First time in 70 years. I want to say that again for the people in the back. First time in 70 years have we first and did a relook at our zoning codes. So we talk about how we've gotten rid of redlining, and you know, we no longer practice redlining and disinvestment in neighborhoods. How is that true when we haven't looked at our zoning codes? I'm from Linden. I'm from the north side. I don't know if we got any north siders in here, but I am from the north side, proud Linden, okay? There are 88 churches in Linden. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm not saying that's a bad thing at all. That's a whole lot of faith in Linden, okay? However, there are also about 50 used tire shops. You'll never find that in any other square mileage. I think Linden's only a couple square miles, only a couple blocks. You'll never find that any other where in the city. You can cross the tracks over to Clintonville. There's zoning for used tire shops, for tire shops in general, is strenuous, right? You got to go through all these hoops and hurdles to even have a tire shop in that area. Why is that not the same for Linden? So when we talk about our zoning codes and we talk about living in place and an investment, that's where the city can really make some change and some focus. Now, it's not an easy task. It's a heavy lift, which is why it hasn't been done in 70 years. It's going to take about a year and a half to just even look at replacing the codes, what we need to do, what we really need to redefine. And it's going to be change that's going to be hard for some of our residents. So it's a task that we took on and that we're ready to take on. So I think that'll be extremely impactful for a lot of our neighborhoods.
Absolutely. And I'm not here to editorialize, but I do think that the rezoning is the surest way to undermine redlining. Just some of it is systemic, honestly. And so that is a great step in the way. But to continue down this path, because why not? So, you know, people have polarized thoughts on neighborhood development, right? With some of us referring to it with the big G word, gentrification. So it is, I mean, honestly, like when you say it, it is very third rail. People have a response to it. But when we're talking about, we have this panel of experts here, right? And so what we want to hear is, what's one question you're most tired of hearing on this subject? And let me preface, Tired doesn't mean that we're ever going to stop this debate, right? Because that's not what we're here to do. Tired means it's something that you hear a lot. But what's one question you're most tired of hearing on the subject, and what would you like to say about it so you never have to answer this one question again? And answer specific, because you were on CTV.
You know, I did look at that question about 3 times on the list. I even looked it up on Google, what the definition was. You know, I didn't really get faced with this question until things start happening on Long Street. When you see people that I know weren't indigenous to the Near East Side skateboarding in the middle of the street, Long Street, it kind of said, ooh, things are changing. Gentrification is the most misunderstood and misinformed word out there as it relates to neighborhood. I think we have to do a better job of understanding the definition, because it's all over the place. And I think, from my aspect, it's a two-edged sword, a double-edged sword. You go in one room, everybody talks about we got to change the neighborhood, we got to remove slum and blight, we got to remove crime, we got to do all that. We go down to the city and say, hey, you're neglecting us, investing us, and do all this stuff. And so the city uses its resources, changing policy, changing the zoning code and all that, and we make it attractive for folks to come in. New sidewalks, new trees, upgrade the parks, do new rec centers, do new policing stations, have grants to improve the facade of building, and we change it. And so people say, ooh, that's beautiful now. I can invest. I feel comfortable. So a lot of times those folks saying that aren't from the community. So I tell the community that they're coming into, welcome the change, understand the change, and use it to your advantage to keep furthering the betterment of the community. So don't be afraid of it. I always have conversations to and fro. Respect that conversation and opinion, because it can be beneficial if done with open arms, an open heart in doing that. So now I'm faced with the question, you know, let's be honest, Long Street has changed. I did what I was supposed to do. As far as the city, the Lincoln Theater, we got the Delphi, we got this, we got $1 million homes. I said, woo, I did it, Ms. Garner, Ms. Gwen, I did it. I did my job. Now the question comes of gentrification. New folks moving in. What's going to happen to our culture? What's going to happen to the people? What's going to happen to our creativity? Well, if you're in the room and you understand and you establish the foundation of the neighborhood and don't waver from that, folks coming in will understand that. Really would. So I was very intentional. We were very intentional about the Lincoln Theater, meaning that we want to have minority participation as best we can in the construction. And I'm not bashful. I know I'm on TV. I don't work for the city. We want to make sure that there's black leadership in the helm that understood and thought black, thinks black, to make it happen. And unbeknownst to me, I was so lucky, I had a dear friend that hit all the accomplishments. So it's going to maintain that cultural vibe. There may be different acts coming in, but it's going to maintain that cultural vibe. The Delphi, I made sure that they understood the color bronze, incorporated an architect. I made for sure that they got art pieces from the neighborhood, from young African-American artists to put in the walls. They even incorporate, if you go in the lobby, is woven things from Africa, the baskets in there. So we want to make sure that people had a feel that this was an African-American community for the most part. So the community has to help people understand this is what it is. Put things out there to be mindful, even though it's changed you in this community. And the people coming in is becoming upon themselves to really understand it. Not conquer, Not taking a Western attitude, I'm conquering, I'm coming in. Understand the neighborhood that you're coming in, the history, and the people here. I grew up on the east side. Miss Gwen to tell you, I ran through her house all the time over there. Wanted to be an East Side Tiger because it was the culture that you wanted to be in. You wanted to wear that orange and black. You wanted to march down Parkwood to go to Harley Field. You wanted to go, it was East High School. And so that feeling is should still here, regardless of the change of the complexion of the community. The community has to understand that, and the folks should not be bashful in coming in. Before I close, everybody should get the book Tigerland, written by Will Haygood. Read that, and you will feel the spirit in that book of the Near East Side East High School, period. I think it's mandatory. Brad, you should have somebody have Larry James, but never let Larry and Donna James, they buy everything. Tell them to get a whole bunch of books, and everybody, new members coming, a patron, you give them a book. And tell them to read it and understand it. And lastly, there needs to be an effort, collaborative effort between the two theaters to come together and really market this community as a cultural icon in this community of the city of Columbus, period. That's the next step. Then you won't lose anything, and everybody benefits. You're enriched by each other. I'll practice all afternoon learning gentrification.
Look, I was about to ask, what's the question again, man? I was so caught
I'm
up.
sorry, man. You know this is my realm, baby.
I understand. I appreciate it. I said I was just going to let Boyce do all the talking. So, now I don't have a whole lot to add. I think that I don't have a question that I'm tired of here. I don't. I haven't gotten there. I hope I never do. Because I think a lot of it is you got to have those open conversations, like Boyce was saying. I don't think a lot of our communities, particularly the communities that have been disinvested, feel they have a voice or the power to negotiate and make change when development is taking place in their neighborhood. And it is my duty, my job, as well as my team, to help them understand what their power, their voice is when it comes to development in their neighborhood. I can't stop somebody from selling their home because they're going to make more on that home now than and set their kids up for generational wealth. I can't stop them from doing that, nor am I going to ask them to do that. My mom just had an offer. She's on 15th and Cleveland still. She just had an offer to sell her home. And it was some god-awful amount. And she looked at me like, yo, I can set the grandbabies up. Now, as her son, I'm sitting there like, yeah, set my kids up for life because I'm not leaving them anything. I'm going to enjoy mine. But also thinking like, yo, if you do that, you know, what's going to happen to Miss Brown on the corner who you always take care of? And, you know, these kids don't have an opportunity. So it's still that culture piece there, right? But no, I would never tell anybody not to move forward to create that generational wealth or whatever you need with those resources, because now these neighborhoods are popping. People want to be there. But how those neighborhoods develop, where people start to come into the neighborhood, I think gentrification more so is about sucking the culture out that was that neighborhood versus buying into the culture, pouring into the culture, supporting the culture and the feel of that neighborhood. So it's going to happen. The development's going to take place. It's how they develop, how they come into the neighborhood. I think that's where the community has a voice, has a chance to speak and really control, and not control, control's a strong word, but really influence how those developments play a part into the fabric of that neighborhood moving forward. And so that's where we want to, where the rubber meets the road. How can we help empower the community to have that voice?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think the only thing I might add is the responsibility we have goes back to what Boyce said earlier, is we have to listen to communities. And when communities, as planners, when they're saying, yeah, we want better sidewalks, fix our streets, give us better transit, help us improve our houses, we have a responsibility to keep listening, but also to look for those mechanisms to help avoid the consequences that can happen. And whether it's looking at ways to stabilize housing as we're improving the neighborhood or improving access to it or bringing jobs closer to the community. I mean, these are things that responsibility lies on the planners, it lies on the city officials, and frankly, I think we all need to do better at it. And I think that's something that I know we've been keeping front of mind as we do it, and that's something we want to keep doing better at.
Sweet. Yeah, part of what we're getting at and talking about is inclusion, honestly, at the end of the day. And so how do we ensure that the people who want to participate and want to remain, or who want to contribute to the development of the space, whether they are developers or contractors, are able to participate in this, you know? And so something that I'm always curious of when we're talking about development of our region at a high level is like, how do we make sure that city planning itself is inclusive, right? And so we could talk about like having listening sessions and those kind of things so we hear people's like perspectives, but when we're talking about like policy and enactment, like how do we make sure that small diverse businesses are included? How do we make sure that diverse contractors are included? We do all agree that positive change to neighborhoods is always a good thing, right? We agreed on those basic premises, but how do we make sure that everybody can actually truly benefit on the Columbus Way as it stands?
Let me, because I got a real life example. Yeah, that's my job. That is their job. I just make sure.
I just want to know, did your mom sell her house?
Yeah. I'm about to say I'm done when she sells it. I was like, wait on the next one. I think, yeah. So when you look at the Office of Diversity and Inclusion from a city's lens, we have 3 lines of business. We have our supplier diversity, workforce diversity, and equity. And so supplier diversity, real simple. How can we spend more money with marginalized businesses? How can the city spend more money with more marginalized businesses? Not the same ones, diverse. We have 6 certifications. We have streamlined that process, and they're still putting more processes in to make it, to remove the barriers that those businesses are running into. We're doing business with the city. Again, what we can control is business with us. The other line of business with workforce diversity, you can't invite people into your home and your home's just nasty and a mess. We got to clean up our house. There are some things that we need to do to create and develop leadership in leadership roles within the city of Columbus. We have 9,000 or so, roughly 9,000 employees that need to feel heard, that need to feel included, that need to feel like they have a path to success. And so we're working on that first, and then we're going to work on how to bring more residents into these jobs and make sure that they're diverse. And we're going out to diverse areas to include them in this space. And then the last piece that I touched on, and our equity manager's here, Dr. Love Benton. So if y'all have any questions around equity, she'll be able to explain all that. Is to measure that work that we're doing, is to measure where we're putting the money, where we're putting the resources. So to your question, I think we had, you know, it's funny, during the civil unrest, I was in the mayor's office. I remember doing a march with the mayor, and he leaned over and said to me, like, this is what we need to be moving toward, this type of movement, but it can't just be on the city. Our private industry has to get involved as well. And if we don't get the private industry understanding that inclusion is needed, this is a miss. This entire movement is a miss. And so I had a conversation recently with a developer. This gentleman has pretty much created a company that's a vertical company that does a special type of attainable housing projects. And he's just booming. I mean, doing phenomenal work. But he came to me, he was like, hey, I want to start setting goals on my projects. And what that means is I want to have a minority spend or a marginalized spend with small businesses on every project that I do in the city. Right now, for us, we measure that, we look at our projects, we put minority spend goals on it. And what that means is you have to spend this amount of money on this project with a marginalized business. He wants to do the same thing. Now, the private sector doesn't have to do that. We did a disparity study. We mandate that on our projects. Private sector doesn't have to do that. He came to me and said, I want to start putting goals on my projects. I want more minorities involved in these projects that I'm working on, or more marginalized businesses as a whole. The other thing he did was he started looking at his developments and said, okay, what do my residents need? There was a need for a daycare. He built one, right? There was a need for more park space in one of his developments. He made more park space. And so I think the intentionality is what's needed to move into that space. I know it was mentioned earlier, but when you start being intentional about how to include individuals into this space, particularly from a private sector, where they don't have the same regulations, that's when you start moving into that. You got to be intentional. You got to put processes in place that last beyond this individual. So when he goes to sell his business, or if somebody from the company comes in and they take over CEO, there's a process in place that's baked into that culture that just continues. And if it's not continuing, if that person leaves and that project or that program or that investment leaves with them, they haven't done their job. My job here is to make sure that we no longer need an Office of Diversity and Inclusion. So when I have done that, I'm good. I can walk away from this. And that's what everyone needs to be working toward, is putting themselves out of business. Think about it. If we needed no more police officers because nobody committed crime anymore, we're good. Why don't we try to strive for that type of greatness? And I think that if our private sector looked at that, and from that same standpoint, how do I serve these residents? How do I serve the people that are working with me? From that same standpoint of, I need to put myself out of business. I need to make sure that this lasts beyond me. Then, we'll be in a better place. But a lot of times that doesn't happen.
I like the word intentional that Jason uses, especially in the private sector. He's dealing with the public sector. He's making sure that the city creates policies to get more diversity into contracts and supplies for the city of Columbus. The private sector, there's a whole lot of money that could be had. So I always ask the question, what is the benefit of diversity for your business? What makes a white developer want to engage with a person of color to do business? Because they don't have to. What is the benefit? And so I share with them there's a benefit financially to them in some way to their business. Voila, they get it. What is going to be the business relationship? You got to understand, they're in the business of making money. Period. I'm sorry, folks, it's not a bad word. I never know anybody going to business not to make money. So what is going to be the benefit? And I share with them there's a business benefit, and at some point in time, it's a social benefit. You're going to encounter a person of color somewhere in your lifetime, some way. And so you need to have a good comfort level of engagement. Now, minority business, I'll speak particularly for African American business, you have to be ready. You got to be ready. You can't carry a wheelbarrow and a hammer around and say, I'm in business and think you want to get $1 million job. That ain't going to happen. And they're going to complain down to the city that you ain't getting nothing. And you ain't telling the city, well, I just got a wheelbarrow and a hammer. That's not fair to the city. This is real life experiences. Dwayne Parks has been with me when we tried to get minority contractors on Adelphi and got embarrassed. So we have to be ready when the call comes. And people have to hold people accountable. If you can't do it, man, just say you can't do it. I play a lot of basketball in this city. And basketball that sport taught me a whole lot of things. Taught me teamwork, taught me I got to understand my role, and we got to win. If you can't play basketball, don't go out there and try to play. Because everybody's doing it. It's the cool thing to be. I'm in business. I'm an entrepreneur. You want to be an entrepreneur, but I'm getting ready to go be a movie star next to Denzel Washington. And so we have to be ready. And then lastly, we have to understand relationships. We have to understand relationships. We should not be afraid to go into a room or go into a coffee house and introduce ourselves. Because I'm going to tell you, most of the developers live in Bexley and up Arlington, and they don't see nobody like me on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. But I make a point to introduce myself in the right way and get to know them so they can feel comfortable with me and call me up. And then you have to have the right black folk in the room. I'm going to go back. Every black folk in the room, people ain't the right person. Because how come we get them in the room and the same thing keeps happening? You ain't got the right one because they're not intentional. Columbus Next Generation is a staffing of 2 people, me and my sister. She's a hustler in the legal sense. She's a hustler. She go get it. Every white developer, the white developer want her right now. She a hustler. She go get it. So you got to develop a relationship. And I'm intentional. My business, majority of my third-party relationship was with African-American people, period. And I'm not bashful saying it. I go in the room, I always bet on black. And I just look at them. And they look at me. So what we going to do? Okay. But I bring in quality. I ain't stupid. I'm bringing people that can do the work. And that's what we have to be. We have to be intentional and hold each other accountable for what this is 2023. That office down there should not even be in existence in 2023. We should have the machine in order. We should have it going and all that. Shouldn't even be in business. Because we have to challenge leadership, and I know he's intentional. He go both sides of the railroad track from the boardroom to the pool hall. He may not look like it, but he does. And so we have to be that way in order to change this dynamic. Systemic racism, whatever, is in existence. Let's get over that. It's dead. Well, we didn't create the policy, so how are we going to think it's going to change? But we got to chip at it each and every year with intent to make change. And lastly, developers, their structure is changing. Most of the old guard that wasn't caring about diversity, they're moving on. Their kids are coming in. So they've been exposed to a lot of things. Either the kids played on AAU with a black guy, or they went to soccer, or they come over here to, what's that thing, Susan, you have on peanut butter and jam sessions and all that? They up here knee deep, interacting. So they're starting to understand and be more receptive. This is something we have to do for a better place. So we have to be intentional in doing what we need to do, and we have to hold those folks that we think are for our benefit accountable for what they're doing, and don't let them off the hook. If they can't handle it, hey, you got to go. Don't, it's nothing personal. I'm looking out for my community. And that's what we have to become in order to change the dynamic, to make sure everything's inclusive. And you have Bill Murdock here. Now, he's very modest about what he does. Leadership goes to him for information about the direction of this region. He sits at the partnership, he sits at the county, he sits at the mayor's office. He gives them information when he knows there's 750,000 people coming here in 10 years. I don't know how he does it, I don't know how he counts it, but he does. It sounds good. Everybody fall in line. He's right here in your community, right here. You ain't got to go downtown and find parking, wait for office. He right here. I bet y'all won't even go into afterwards and say, hey, how can I be involved? I'm telling you what to do. And I know her. Yeah. So this is what you got to be intentional. Don't be bashful. He's only going to do what's in front of him. He can't say, man, we got to make sure that this is inclusive, because I was out on the Lincoln Theater, boy, it was 100 and some people chomping at my leg. He got strength now. Okay, who we need? He gonna call, hey, boys, who I need to have on there? I don't know, man, don't have me. I'm too old. That's where we have to go, folks.
All right, so we're going to pivot a little bit.
All right.
And because we're going to, with that, look to the future, right? So there is development happening here actively, right? We're clear of that. And, we're talking about inclusivity, and we're talking about how do we grow. And so, like, for me, from my perspective, I would do a lot of work with small businesses. And for me, education is a big part of it, because I can't expect people to be able to participate if we haven't equipped them in such a way so they could participate. So that is where I come into the sphere. But from you guys, from your perspective, like where you sit specifically right now, what are some things that we need to be looking at critically? What critical issues or changes should we be looking at to make sure that we do handle this future? And so when we're talking about Columbus in 20 years, we're not having some of these same conversations.
I mean, that's a big question. And I think one way that we think about it is about what we like to say is paying it forward. Yeah, we stole it from Ohio State, but it's a good phrase. And what I mean by that is being very intentional about connecting young people to careers in public service, about connecting local governments to more information about the history and how to correct it and get in front of it. So I'll give you an example. So we partner with, we're a little bit like a Chamber of Commerce. So we're a Chamber of Commerce, but for local governments. So we've got 85 local governments we work with. Only one of them is named Columbus. And I'll tell you what, a lot of them are looking to us, like Boyce had said, saying, how can we get in front of this? How can we be more inclusive? How can we get in front of growth by looking at diversity differently? And so we partnered with the YWCA, and we partnered with the Columbus Council on World Affairs to try to connect those leaders to that awareness and that training. We've partnered with local universities, trying to connect young people into public service, and that started as an idea with 5 people. And this coming summer, we're putting 50 young people in local governments, many from diverse backgrounds, so that they can see jobs in motion, they can have that impact. And I know you're hiring one of them, so thank you for it. But the idea is, well, good. Oh, thank goodness. So, but a lot of students coming out of college don't even think about careers in public service. They don't even think about planning, or maybe they think about your job, but maybe not even. And what we want to do is give them that experience, make sure they get paid when they do it, make sure they're connected to mentors when it happens, so that we're building that next wave of leaders that looks more like their region looks, and puts them in connection with important people like the ones on either side of us. And that's something that we're keeping really front of mind as we're thinking for the future.
You want to hear from me again? I mean, it goes back to the previous question. I mean, I'm looking at my life now. I'm on the other side of the mountain. It's incumbent upon me to share insight to younger folks. I admire younger people because they have so much information available to them, social media and everything. I'm just amazed, man, y'all can do a whole lot. But what they miss is that foundation of how to deal with and talk to people. The basic human element is what you miss. And they want to leapfrog 10 steps to get to the 20th. I said, man, I got a whole lot of scars on my back from this neighborhood stuff, from black folks beating me up and telling me I can't do it. And I just looked at them and said, look at me now. We need to share those experiences. Young folks listen to older people that have been in the game, and older people listen to young folks, because they are your legs. A gentleman, because I'm always out in the neighborhood. I was over here, the Lincoln Cafe, older gentleman, talked to me about development. He said, what you gonna do? I said, what do you mean? He said, how you gonna pass the baton on to somebody to be a voice? I said, ooh, that's a good question, because I ain't never thought of succession plan. I just get up and do it. But that is key. Some folks just gotta get out the way. We're older. We're stuck in our ways. We don't want to change. We're scared of risk. We just want comfortable shoes, right? But we have a lot of wisdom. I listen. Brad will tell you, Brad's mom was Garner. I listened to a Jim Roseborough, Jerry Hammond, Phil Lomax, Bob Dillard, Dr. Preston. They taught Judge Duncan, who lived on Monroe, and it was so fun to tell a quick story. So when he died, they had a big ceremony at OSU for him. Now, he could never live on OSU, so I thought it was so ironic they were doing all this thing on OSU. He couldn't live on OSU's campus because he's African American, but they did it, changed. I listened to him. And so you have to listen, young folks, to older people. This don't come into a neighborhood that, and we want this. Well, hold up, slow down. You don't even know why it's like this. And so I think it's incumbent for me to pass on. I love these type of opportunities to share information. Because I'm old, fat, gray haired, ready to go home now and put my feet in some water, get me a milkshake, and I'm good. But I think I have something to share to young people to carry the baton, to keep challenging people to change. The march downtown was cool. Still waiting. We gonna have another march? Let's put people in place that can make effective change. You have one in Jason. You have a resource. He open. He knows city government, understands city government, county government, state government. They impact your life. I tell another story. Everybody goes to the Board of Education and complain. The Board of Education just managing the resources. The policies is done at the State Department of Education, downtown. We don't go down there, we go here. And they looking at you like, hey, can't do nothing. Then you get frustrated, then you're mad. You go into the wrong door. Go to the right door and have those conversations. Call people, challenge your elected officials. When they come out here, want your vote, ask them point blank. Don't be afraid. If they good, they can answer the question. If not, you can have your decision. So I have to impart so we continue this momentum. I like the young people. I like when Brad puts these things on and have people come to the community. Let's share, let's talk. Let's get back to the old picnic, sitting around, talking, learning. There's a whole lot of information and wisdom you can learn from people. Believe me, that's what helped me.
For those who don't know, Brad is Susan Bradford, the executive director of the Lincoln.
Yeah, I'm sorry, yeah. It's Brad and it's Big Brad. Big Brad you don't want to meet. Big Brad, I tell people, if you mess with Brad, ooh, buddy, I'm just going to let you know. It won't be a good thing. No, we grew up together. Well, I can't tell you the stories.
All right, I'm gonna stop him right there. No, I appreciate that, and I appreciate what you said, boys. I spend a lot of time listening and asking for guidance. I know we spend many a nights having phone calls like, "Hey, bro, I'm about to do this. How does it feel?" But I think to answer your question, Avery, is from the lens and the seat that I sit in, it is looking at those past practices and those past procedures, code that denied individuals access because of how they identify themselves, right? So even in the language, how we operate as a city, trying to put in place things that will make it easier for folks who have been marginalized, left out, had to go through all the hoops and hurdles because they don't have the right, for small businesses, the right back office that understands how to do that work. For me, the thing that we need to work on from the lens and the seat that I sit in are those policies, those procedures, those codes. So I think what I would say for anyone coming into this space or wanting to do some of this work and engage and develop and grow their neighborhood, really look at those policies, those codes, similar to what Boyce was saying. Identify who's making the decisions in those spaces, right? It may not affect you immediately, but it will affect you in some way, shape, or form. So I would say look at those things, learn it, understand it, and see where the inequities and the opportunity for change is. And there's a process to it all to change it. And there's momentum for that change to happen. I think now is, we got to strike while the iron's hot.
Absolutely, thank you. And so we have about 10 or 15 more minutes left in this conversation. So if you have questions, you can come to the podium and I'll recognize you. And while you do that, because I'm sure there's some really burning hot questions coming from the audience.
Don't be bashful.
Don't be bashful, because
I don't want you to go out in the parking lot, well, I wanted to ask this question, but they get, I know the drill. Don't
right, and
trust me,
there
I've
is
been
a huge, or not huge,
yeah,
bum rush
get on-
to the microphone.
yeah.
So you could ask a question.
Yeah, ask.
But one thing that I do want to ask, because we talked a little bit about legacy a second ago, so talking about succession. So one thing I say, and I always joke, so people, if you knew my dad, Frank Watson, people
Very
always
well.
say that I'm a mini-me of my dad. So I got it, honestly, I just got it by osmosis. But, if you saw somebody coming up, or if you could say something to somebody who was younger, who wanted to get into your role, who wanted to try to take a day in your footsteps, what might be some advice that you would offer to somebody like myself or to somebody younger coming up who wants to really, really get into community development?
I think you need to develop a thick skin, learn how to let it roll off your back. That's the biggest challenge I had, because I was taking it personal, because I wanted to do well, because I had so many eyes looking on me for me to fail. And sometimes you become sensitive. One, develop a thick skin. Two, sit back and sometimes listen more to what really people are saying, and practice good communication. And if they say something to you don't understand, repeat it back to them, because you don't want to leave there with not a good understanding, because you could be going off in a direction that they may not want it. So make sure that you develop a thick skin and listen to people and where they are, and communicate effectively. So I tell people when they come to proposals with me, I said, man, can my mom understand what you're saying? And look at me. I said, can my mom understand what you're saying? I said, repeat. Give me the 30-second speech. And if they can't give you the 30-second speech, they don't know the project too well. And so remember that. And so that's what I tell folks. And don't be so impatient that you're going to be CEO in the next week, because it took me a while to get me to make $20,000 a year. So don't jump. Just be patient. It's going to come. You live long enough, it's going to come if you do the right things.
I mean, I love this question a lot, and I think there's a couple things you could do. I think first, don't be afraid to ask people to mentor you, or to ask them how they got there. And just trying to practice what I preach here. If a young person reaches out to my office and says, can I talk to you? The answer is always yes. I mean, it might be a little crazy with the scheduling, but we will always make it work. We will always make it work. And part of the trick there is not just to talk to them once and listen, but is to try to build that relationship. And so building mentors, whether they're in your community or they're public leaders or they're business people or whatever it is, being really intentional about building that, because I tell you what, leaders don't get asked that often. And when they do, they get really excited about it and they want to help you succeed. And so if you're a young person, build that network of people who are pulling for you and want to help cut through red tape or connect you with people. And I think the other thing I'd say is to raise your hand for things that might not seem core to what you want to do, or might seem really hard. And the reason I say that is, you hear our paths, all of them were kind of wandering, like you're still wandering. Yeah.
I still don't know what I'm going to be.
That's right. That's right. Well, and so if you've got this ideal and you see something that might be kind of close to it, raise your hand for it. If you're working at the Lincoln Theater, talk to Ms. Bradford and say, hey, I see you doing this thing. How can I do it? She might not say you can do it right away, but she might say, all right, I see you want to do more. Let's give you some experience in something. Just raise your hand and ask a lot of questions. And I think that'll help you as you're trying to figure out what you want to be, but it could open up doors you might not expect.
I'm going to be brief because I see a gentleman has a question. I think similar to what everybody said, I second that. And then also, I think my focus and where I sit is a servant mindset. So I'm always trying to serve my clients, whether it be the departments that I work with or the residents that I'm working with or the staff at the city, right? Like I'm always serving somebody, and I've shared this with the team, that this is the mindset that we're gonna go in moving forward. It's not bowing down or being in a space where somebody's gonna talk down to you, because you gotta teach people how to talk to you and how to treat you. So I'm good with that part. But if Jesus can wash feet, that's the focus that I want our team to be in that space of being that servant. So if I was to give anyone advice, I would say follow that mindset of being a servant and supportive to your neighbor.
Thank you all. All right, so we have a question approaching the podium. Yes? No? He's standing there, so I thought that he had a question.
Here comes one.
We do have a question coming up. And so, because I believe in us as people, hear me, we're going to be brief. We're going to use brevity. We're going to ask our question in a way that is digestible and that our panelists can answer in an also brief and brief way. Okay, go forth.
Don't give the voice answer, that's what she just said.
I mean,
Okay, I have a small transportation company, and I travel a lot, and I'm in different cities like Chicago's, Atlanta, DC, and they have like the union stations that offer transportation, different types of services in and out of their cities. So I noticed that the Greyhound station is going through some operations. What kind of planning do you have for the city of Columbus with that amount of people coming in? How are you going to accommodate people with transportation services?
Uh-oh, there you go.
that sounds like a Bill question.
I love that question.
Yeah, he
I love
does.
that question. So, and thank you for the services that you provide, because getting people to where they need to be is really, really critical. So this is a good week to be asking that question. And the reason I bring it up is it's Wednesday. On Monday, community leaders stood up and asked to restore an option that we don't have here, and that's passenger rail. And if you don't know this, it's not a badge of pride. We are the largest region in the country that doesn't have passenger rail. We need to fix that. It's a no-brainer. We can't compete. We can't give people access. But that's something that there's a window of opportunity we've been planning for that we're asking to make happen. I don't know if it'll be Union Station, but I know the convention center's already designed it. And so we got to rally to get it so we can get to Cleveland and Cincinnati, Chicago, Pittsburgh. When it comes to Greyhound or bus transit or those things, there's an initiative called Link Us that is really just starting to heat up over the next year and a half to bring new types of access for folks, new types of mass transit, new types of ways to connect to housing and jobs, and there's a lot of energy around that. So, and I won't even get into all the new technology that's happening, which I know you're probably trying to grapple with or get in front of with your business. There's a lot of opportunity when it comes to that.
Link Us, L-I-N-K.
So what I'm gonna ask you to do, you see this young lady right here up front?
Wave your hand.
I'm gonna ask you to get her card.
Ms. Ring,
Ms. Ring will send you all the information
Ms.
on
Ring.
Linked Us that we have and a point of contact at the city as well. So it's a conglomerate of different organizations like Morpsey, CODA, the city, regional partners that are looking at mass transit. And let me ask this question, are you certified with the city?
Not certified.
So you see this gentleman right here, the bald-head gentleman with the pretty-eyed guy
Mr.
right there?
Gentleman.
Can you please touch base with him and make sure that you get his card so we can certify you with the city as well?
Great.
Thank you.
and lastly, here's the connection, relationship. See these two young ladies that raised their hand?
Hands waved.
Get with them, get the information so you can set up a meeting with this gentleman, so you can share your thoughts and your observations going to Chicago, DC, and Atlanta around those issues, and maybe you have an idea that may help.
Looking forward to it.
Great.
Beautiful.
Thanks.
Awesome.
That'll
Thank
cost you
Appreciate
a
it.
cup of coffee.
Yeah, well, I'm good for a cup of
Well,
coffee.
boys.
I'll gladly pay you Tuesday.
For a hamburger tomorrow?
Good boys.
Just while we're on record, I want to be clear. Boyce asked for the coffee, not no city
Right.
employees, okay? I want to be clear, not us.
No, I think the advice was, the cost of the advice was coffee to Boyce. One or two more. Yes,
You
ma'am.
got a few back here.
Okay, awesome. For community members that just want to get involved, but this isn't their full-time job, do you guys have recommendations of ways that we can assist your missions or a resource we can digest to at least be informed of the movements?
So where you live?
I live downtown on Gay and High.
Area commissions. Every neighborhood has an area commission. Downtown has also an area
They
commission.
got what they call is it called a downtown resident council?
Yeah, I think it's the resident
Yeah,
council.
it is.
So I would suggest, and I can, again, this young lady right up front here, get her information. I'll get you connected with the community liaison that works for the city, and she'll bring you in. She actually lives downtown as well, and we'll get you involved in as much or as little as you want to. Now, be careful. It's kind of like church. You come in, you just run the boys' league. Next thing you know, you up doing a sermon on Sunday, right? But it's phenomenal in a good way to, one, keep abreast of what's going on in your neighborhood, but two, to get involved and have a voice.
Thank you.
I might just add to that, that there's a secret when it comes to plans with the city or MORPC. Every time you make a comment, we have to do something with it. It doesn't mean we have to make it happen, but we have to look at it, we have to think about it, we have to incorporate it into our process. So we just held an open house, last night? Yes. Yeah, and so there's opportunities right now to say, hey, I want a better sidewalk, I need a different road, this isn't working, we need transit. So we'll connect you to that information.
And the city of Columbus has a website to connect you to downtown, and Morpsey has a website too to show you events and activities. And I tell everybody, get engaged. That's the only way you're gonna find out, and it's easy. I've been learning how to learn a computer now, so.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. You mentioned, Jason, about having 6 different certifications. Is that for the small business division? Why?
So we have, actually, Taylor does a lot of our certification as well. So we do have 6 different categories. So veterans, LGBTQAI+,
Oh, I see.
women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, small business, and then emerging businesses, which is a category we use for businesses that we can't count to our minority goals that are outside of Franklin County. So those are the 6 certifications that we have.
Oh, 6 different certifications for individuals who are doing business.
Right.
Okay. But probably someone from, like myself, I would fit into maybe 2 of those, or
If you so choose. If you
Yeah.
identify in that space, yes.
So, as a female and minority-owned,
Yes.
business. So I know several small businesses that are interested in doing business with the city, the state, and the federal government.
Mhm.
Has there ever been anything, that you do one certification that qualify you throughout?
Yeah,
that
we
has
were-
been worked on for many, many years.
Yeah,
I'm just
so
saying,
we do have so I'm gonna try to be as clear as possible because I just had to go through this with another company today. We do have a reciprocity agreement with the county, the state, and I believe it's OMSDC, Dwayne?
MSDC, yes.
OMSDC and WeBank. And so what that looks like is we do accept their certification and we do identify you as a minority or a marginalized business. But we still ask you to go through somewhat a fast track process with us because we want to also certify you and count you to our goals. So the way that we count small businesses to our goals is because of the disparity study that we just did. You have to be within city limits, so Franklin County. We do have some pieces that are outside of Franklin County, like Delaware and Fairfield. But you also have to qualify and be a owner and operator of your business. And so those are kind of the criteria that we look at to make sure, but we do accept those other certifications from the state to county, and we do have a reciprocity agreement. It's just if you're outside of that, you may not count to our minority goals. We'll still certify you and accept you as a minority-owned business, but you may not count to our goals.
what's the percentage of contracts that you all have a percentage or a number anymore?
It depends on the project. So if
I
you
got
look at, say, a firehouse, we're building a $20 million firehouse up the street. We look at how many minorities or marginalized businesses are in the space that, from the requirements that are needed. So you need concrete, you need drywall, you need electricity. So we break that down, we put it into a formula, and that gives us our goals. So typically for a firehouse, it's somewhere between 15 to 20% minority spend on that particular project. But it changes with the size of the project.
Or the contracts?
Mm-hmm.
And how is that going?
It's going
Getting
well.
here? Okay.
It's going well. The foundation has been laid. It's time to innovate. For me, it's time to innovate the process. It's time to streamline the process. I'm hearing there are pain points in the bargaining process. So how to bid on a project for minority-owned businesses, and making sure that their language is proper and it's where you can see it, what we're asking of you. Really trying to create opportunities for people to engage with the city easier and at a lower barrier threshold. But it's going really well. I enjoy the work that we're doing, and I think we're going to be able to do more.
Thank you.
She didn't ask me a development question.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here. We talked a little bit about creative housing solution in other metros, but I'm curious to know if you've found any creative housing solutions within Franklin County, maybe especially speaking toward the sustainability piece.
Bond package. Yeah, so I will make sure I get you the housing plan. There's a young lady by the name of Erin Prosser who that's what she eats, sleep, dreams is housing. And so there is a preservation component to how we're going about engaging with different areas of the city, making sure that, again, people can live in their home and stay in place. We don't want to tear down every house that's out there. We can't. Legally, we just can't. What we want to do, though, is create opportunities for folks to obtain those houses, whether it be working with the Freedom Fund, and they do small business, but maybe they'll move into the housing space if we give them some more money and ask them to. I don't know. I said that on tape now.
It was on tape. You all are my witnesses.
But looking at what that down payment looks like for folks, looking at what that first home buyer program, can we look at different programs, bring those programs to bear, make sure they're all in one place and accessible. Those are things that we're looking at with these bond package dollars, and working with our banks and our private sector to see if they can come on board and join us with that. So there are some ideas out there, but it's piecemealing it together. Everybody's situation is a little different, so how do we make sure that we're creating that one pager for the individual to access?
And I might give a shout out there are some communities in Franklin County, in addition to Columbus, that are doing some really creative things. If you haven't been to Whitehall lately, they are doing incredible work. Everything from trying to build new types of housing at different income levels, to tackling long vacant properties, to container housing, to they've connected workforce and headquarters to new housing in that. They're really doing creative things. You're seeing communities like Reynoldsburg do those kind of things. There's been an effort to, it's not just about building the housing, sometimes it's about the policy. And Columbus did this, but source of income protection, which makes it really knocks down a big barrier to just even renting. Because you, as a landlord, if a community has that law in place, you can't look at where the income comes from. And that's so important if you're trying to knock down that discrimination, that barrier to entry for a lot of folks. There's also a lot of things, you mentioned sustainability. There's a lot of communities looking at how to connect housing in more sustainable ways, whether it's energy or connecting it to trails or those type of things. There's a lot of innovation going on. We just need a lot more of it.
Right, especially those shipping containers. Sounds really cool.
That's right, they are.
Yeah, I mean, don't laugh. I just met with a gentleman out of Detroit that wants to do shipping containers as it relates to housing.
I actually know somebody very local that's working here.
So yeah, that's an interesting concept.
Yeah.
He had different sizes and everything. Talked to me, I think. But when you ask sustainability, you asking a question beyond when it was built, how you sustain it to make it affordable for a long period of time, correct? I think
it really is covering all of those bases, and that's why I think that shipping container homes are a really equitable option too, with the cost savings, with energy, and as well as how durable it is as well. So
how are they being received?
Well, we have our. Can I call up a friend?
Sure.
Yeah, we're gonna find out here in Whitehall here pretty soon.
Yeah,
so.
because that's a good discussion. I mean, because me personally, I couldn't move into a house that looked like a shipping container that you see on the barge in the movies. It doesn't.
When he's done with it, they don't look like that.
Well, I mean, that's for the people out here that viewing and listening.
No, that's a good point.
And now's a good time to talk about yourself.
Absolutely. I'm Sean Ford. Hey, how you doing today?
Oh,
Pleasure. I'm Sean Ford. I am a micro developer. We are skilled at infill development. One of the benefits of shipping containers is it really helps with narrow lot scenarios, if you will. As far as, the overall aesthetic appeal, we largely create an opportunity using composite products as an example where we do undersell the concept of the shipping container to make them acceptable, if you will. So a lot of modern, SoCal looks, if you will, to really help people understand that we typically fear what we don't understand. And we also understand that, people, while they embrace new concepts, also are creatures of habit. So ultimately, there is a delicate balance with how we go about the elevations to make them, naturally accepted within the community. But the primary benefit, of course, is, cost savings and speed. We're typically able to build in 6 months or under, which is one of the ways to address, the underdevelopment issue that we have here in the city of Columbus.
Have you ran into any issues as it relates to code enforcement?
Yeah, great question. So did we have to go through a ringer? Yes. It took 4 months to, get a residential approved application.
Permitting.
For building permits. So, ultimately what we had to show, because the International Building Code does have a methodology that as long as you can prove that it is similar or better than existing standards, but it ultimately means we as developers have to do our due diligence of how we communicate simplistically so that, our mothers and grandmothers can understand to really overcome the fear of the unknown. So an example, a shipping container, right, once built, will literally be the same dwelling 400 years from now. Stick build, which is what all of our codes are predicated on, is only designed to last 50 years. Right. You look at energy efficiency. When we did res checks, that was required by the city of Columbus. Rarely is a requirement for a developer. Our homes are 70% more energy efficient than a traditional home. So when you look at a cost feasibility standpoint, our build costs, all in, even with site development, is typically $100 a square foot is what the hard cost. So the solution that shipping containers provide really are largely created to address a lot of the affordability issues because, no margin, no mission. As a developer, we have to make profit. But where we saw an opportunity is to innovate essentially the last industry that has not been innovated, which is real estate. Real estate is still done the same way it was 220 years ago. So what we would like to see happen, right, is ongoing dialogue. And part of the reason why we didn't do a mass PR campaign, knowing pundit to previous projects, is because well said is not well done. So ultimately, City of Whitehall knows we've largely intentionally done no PR because I can show you better than I can tell you. We'll break ground beginning in June with the first 4 builds, the next 4 thereafter, and hopefully we'll be fast tracking a 3.5 acre project where through multifamily and standalone, we'll be, delivering over 100 units to the city of Whitehall, which will be forthcoming details as well.
Are you from Atlanta?
Yes, sir.
I met you.
Yeah, we met at the Our Brothers Keepers event.
Yeah, he's gonna do the. You had an
Yeah.
Okay. So now that we've established that we're family,
Yes.
I'm gonna jump in, and I'm gonna unfortunately have to wrap this up.
Yes, ma'am.
But I'm really glad that we got to wrap up on such a cool example.
Hey, we got one more question.
I'm sorry, I was told to do the wrap, but if we have one more question, then we can do
Yeah, we'll be quick.
the boss.
We'll be quick.
She the boss is the wrap? Okay. One more question. Okay.
Hi, thank you. So my wife and I moved here to Columbus back in August. We moved into Wineland Park. This is kind of a transportation, but also an equity question. From our understanding, Wineland Park is one of the neighborhoods with the most people who either walk to work or take transit to work, right? But it's also where US Route 23 is. And so, we live on 4th Street, right? And it's a highway. It's a one-way highway with cars flying down the streets, right? And so we look at, kids trying to cross over to Wineland Park, right near about getting hit by cars who, the speed limit's 35 miles per hour, but really they're driving 40 or 45 miles per hour. But then also in the summer, when we're trying to save on electricity costs, right, we open up the windows and we get this, in a couple of days, this thick layer of black dust from, the exhaust fumes, but also, I guess, particulate matter from the tires and stuff like that, right? And so it seems to me there's this inequity between the kind of transportations people in the neighborhood use versus what the neighborhood's being used for by other people. And I was wondering what routes do y'all think would be wise to take in order to maybe address that inequality in the neighborhood?
I mean, it's a combination, because it's Route 23, that's the state.
Right.
And I assume you're talking about lowering the speed limits and doing all kind of cosmetic things.
Right. It would be great to make them two-way streets instead of one-way streets.
Yeah.
I mean, in the 40s or 50s, I think, is when they were converted to one-way streets.
Yeah, I think first start, you got to get, not just you, but a lot of people in the community
Right.
talking about it. The next step is to go to the Public Service Department for the City of Columbus and voice your concerns concretely and technically what the issues are. And then encourage them to be in the state, because the state the only one can change that route, because it's Route 23.
Right.
And so to sit down collectively and how we can better. I mean, it's going to be pushback, and they're going to say, well, it costs too much, it's going to back up, but I think that needs to be addressed 4th Street and Summit.
Right.
Because the neighborhood is becoming more of a neighborhood.
Right. But it's hard to do that when there's
Right.
cars flying.
When it was
down the
built, planners made sure that people got out of downtown the quickest way.
Yeah.
And so, unfortunately, that's still in existence. But I think now, since Wyland Park, the University District has changed to appear to be more walkable, I think you have to start asking that question to the right folks. I'm giving you the right folks to talk to.
Yes, sir.
And since the city of Columbus is going to more district representation of council people, who find out who wins that and have that conversation with them too, to get everybody engaged. I think it's been talked about, but nobody has continued that conversation.
Thank you.
You might add to the city's got a really intense effort around safety right now called Vision Zero. And part of what that effort's doing is looking for the most pressing problems around the community where it comes to safety. So engaging with that effort, it's Vision Zero. And I think there's reason for optimism too. I mean, the city just tackled reversing years of planning and working with the state. They're looking at lowering the speed limit downtown. Right. Specifically to address that speedway problem. And I know that there's a lot of thinking going into other issues around the city. So do what Boyce said. That's a good lesson in life. But also make sure you're talking to your representatives to City of Columbus about it.
How long you lived in Wyland?
Since August.
Okay. So I grew up in that area, not too far from there. It was called Short North. It wasn't Wyland. And my mom actually is a lunch lady at Wyland Park Elementary. She's been there 28 years. So I spent a lot of time over there. It's interesting that you bring that up as far as the traffic and the speed and, walkability. One, I appreciate it, but then I also know about some of the other issues that community is dealing with outside of the traffic and the walkability, and there's some access issues that we're dealing with, that community is dealing with. So I would, like Boyce said, strongly encourage you to work with your community and identify what their key issues are. And I'm sure some of it plays into the traffic piece, but I would start with their list and see as a community what it is they can do and start checking off those boxes and work your way to that point of, is traffic the biggest issue that we're dealing with? Because what you're asking the city to do is change people's behavior. And people are creatures of habit. And if they choose to speed, the only way to slow that individual down is the car in front of them. But if the car in front of them chooses to speed, right, I can put as many speed bumps, dividers, they're going to tear that up. They're going to fly over them. They're going to run into them. When a community chooses to say these folks that are driving through needs to slow down, things change. They slow down because now that community's driving that same speed, that proper speed, and everybody behind them have to slow down. So I'm gonna ask you to start with the community, ask them and engage with them through the area commissions. I think right now, Councilwoman Lourdes Barroso de Padilla is over public safety. I would reach out to her office, I would touch base with her and really get that community buy-in and identify what those issues are. And I'm sure that's one of them, but that probably doesn't land on their top, and work with them and work down that list. That would be my, and if you need connections to any of them, you see that young lady right there? She'll help you get connected with all of them. Thank you.
Thank you.
You can pass it off to Taylor. Taylor, help me, brother.
It's kind of hard to stop a good conversation. And I just want to thank everyone who had their question here. Thank you for engaging with our panelists, and panelists for giving really good sound information and direction to that. Boyce and Jason, you know where my heart lies in the community and in arts and culture. Oftentimes, we know that community is rich because of the culture. In my time being here, arts has grown into that as well. Boyce, you mentioned about knowing the creativity of that community. And so as we move ourselves into these positions in the political arena, in city council and other places where development is happening, arts is not on the top list of conversations. So I'm asking, how do we integrate that? How do we advocate that the arts conversation is a part of the top 3, 4, 5 pillars when we're talking about city planning and urban development? The Lincoln is that catalyst, right? We've been saying that since 2009, and it has proven itself and has been realized on multiple levels. First with your vision and the others' visions, Larry's and Bill's visions, Boyce, but now Jason also in the position where you are sustaining that. And one of my tasks and obligations, and one of my passion is to keep that there. So I wanted to see if you could just speak on how the arts can become a part of the pillars in deciding city planning and urban development.
I want to point somebody out. Mr. Otto Beatty Jr., how are you, sir? Good to see you. Third, I'm sorry. When you talk about art and development, this young man has done something on the east side to that point, hired a local artist, and really has a beautiful mural that ties into the community. But that was intentional. That was because he knows culture, because he knows art, because he knows the community. It goes back to that, empowering the community to have a voice.
Right.
So when developers come in and they ask for the variances and they want to do certain things within the community, it's really saying, yeah, that's cool. We want to see that happen, but we want you to do that in this way, in this manner. We want it to look like this. We want it to feel like this. These are not just visual art, but actually, when you're talking about performance, these are the type of things we want to happen on your property, in your property, around your property. These are things the community has the power to ask for, so they have a cohesive community and they actually speak to the culture. So I think with developers like Otto and individuals really tapping on them and saying, hey, can you talk to these other developers to come look at your project and what you're doing. For us as a city, this is something that we can build into. If you're going to get anything from the city, these are things we're going to ask you to do. And I know Mike Stevens has definitely taken a lens in that space and is really moving at art projects. When we start looking at roads and sidewalks, art is involved in how we do that. A lot of murals under underpass ways and things like that. So I think, giving us ideas to be more creative. Now, I would love to create like a Dr. Seuss type street, but there are state regulations that will not allow for that to happen. But I think there are opportunities for us to engage a little differently in the art space for sure.
Thank you.
Well, Susan, you know my thoughts around arts.
I do.
I'm wholeheartedly supportive of art. visual art, African American art specifically. If you look at my office and my home, that's all it is, and I hang out with Larry James, that's all he does. I think it's very important to have arts, the visual arts in the community, period. The King Lincoln Bronzeville District was based upon arts. That was the development brand. Came together with an idea, nothing sophisticated, didn't go to Harvard or they come up with this brand, King Lincoln. Just took King and Lincoln and put them together. The whole concept for us was to create a cultural arts district, creative cultural arts district, and I'm not bashful in saying this, for African American folks to show their creativity to a broad sense. That was it. Because I think, and I lived it, African Americans are the most creative folks in the world. Everything is copied off of us. So what we needed, I want to be in a position to create those venues where it can happen and be showcased and everybody feel comfortable coming over here and looking at it. That was the basics of this revitalization, period. Around arts and culture. That's what we kept saying. Columbus, for this, they made us go, the broader Columbus made us go through hurdles. How can arts and culture be economic development, the impact? So we had to do a book about this thing, showing folks how it impacts economic development, the arts. Because most people don't think. Just think about it. If you didn't have the museum, if you didn't have paintings on the wall, if you didn't have public art, what would this city look like? It would be bland as heck, and nobody would want to come here to live. You don't have a creative wall like over there. People come look at. They don't know half the people up there. They come look at it. You lose that element. A civilized society has arts and culture. I've always made it a part of my plan. You go up to Linden now. I mean, we got art pieces in the Linden Fresh Market. We're getting ready to have a young lady do a mural. I'm big on murals because what? I took the idea from Brazil. If everyone watched the 1996 Olympics when they went to Brazil, they went to the community. What's in the community? It was graffiti. And they looked at it and said, man, some of this is good.
Yeah.
And so the whole city got murals. And there have been artists making millions of dollars going traveling, doing graffiti. We need to cultivate. It needs to be a part of the discussion each and every time. Hey, what's it look like? I've been in the developer's office and said, man, that's a nice painting. You should do that over here. You talk about that in your interior design. We talked to Susan about how to incorporate it. I talked to Lynn Grimes about art. It is very important that maintains continuation of history and culture through visual arts, theatrical arts, and everything. That's what this whole thing was built upon, period. So where can you go?
Right.
That's the boardroom right there.
Thank you, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. And thank you all for the questions. And I want to thank our panelists for participating in tonight's activity. This was a great conversation, and I hope that, and it sounds like they all are receptive to ongoing conversations, so you better grab them before they leave. But I really want to thank you all for this conversation and for your candor and for this time and for this conversation. Thank you to the Lincoln Theater for this conversation. The Community Conversations is an ongoing panel kind of discussion, so keep an eye out for other cool topics that you might be able to hear and take a peek at. And then also, I bet that if you looked later, you could find this on the Columbus TV or the CTV feed. And then you could share this with folks. So if you heard something here tonight that you want to share, please do. And with that, I'm going to say thank you very much for attending tonight's conversation. And yeah.